Right, good evening and welcome to Financial Spreadsheeting class number 6. It seems it is, so let's get underway. So in one sense, tonight, week 6, marks the end of what I call the pure Excel section. So we move on in week number 7 to aspects of, I guess, Excel automation involving things like VBA and still parts from material in weeks 1 through 6 as well. Do a bit more work on the assignment tonight, and to point the way, the material for the assignment's meant to complete in the class this evening, but I will in fact update on the website the assignment 1 project page with a few more links about how to work things out, okay? Because some things are quite tricky, it seems, and some of them, even though you might have in fact found the answer, it's still a bit hard to work out how it was done. And this afternoon, a student was asking me about, for example, writing the advanced filter to in fact separate out the hash NAs, the row before and the row after, and he was showing me an Excel file with a solution which I'd written 2 years ago, and I couldn't quite remember. I sort of figured out the logic partly, but I knew it was actually quite hard to work out. That's why you've got this exercise and there's the solution to it at the end. But it seems like when he did the exercise, he downloaded the solution file, but didn't actually read the solution part, which explained how it worked. So I was sort of slightly annoyed, went back and, well, there it is, read it. And then asked me the next stage if we still can't figure it out. So basically it's just it's a 3-line filter. They're on 3 different rows, so it's actually a series of OR statements. And of course, from class number 2, what returns true or false when you've got 3 ORs in a row, for example. Okay, that's how the filter works, and it actually looks very simple, but it's slightly challenging understanding what's going on. So let's get underway on the class tonight now. The first part I did in the class this afternoon involved aspects of a pivot table. So I don't give you many documents involving PowerPoint slides. So I'll open up a file here, and I've got this. This is in fact a university laptop, but I've had it for decades, and even though it's got Windows 10, it still doesn't work very fast anyhow. But it has in fact got Excel 2016, which is the main reason I brought it this evening, just to use for a short time. Okay. So basically here we're going to start this PowerPoint presentation, which actually appears on the LMS. And on this first page here, I only wrote this yesterday, and I haven't taught this material for probably about almost a decade now, and I keep getting asked in this subject, I wish we could do a little bit of work on pivot tables in this class. And because I'm such a veteran of spreadsheets, a long time ago they were in fact called data pivots, okay? But they actually moved to pivot tables. And when I in fact wrote the head, the first line there on that, so I actually called them a data table. In fact, it should be, of course, be called a pivot table. So just jot down that one should in fact say the word, not overt, but pivot. Pivot table. Okay, that should in fact make the thing a bit more logical. And in the class this afternoon, I didn't even have time to print out my slides, so I couldn't actually refer back to them, but there's around about 8 slides in the set there, and we'll go through those just to show you basically how pivot tables work. And although they are useful, it's good to know that they exist and what they do, but we certainly can't spend 6 hours doing them in their any sort of fairness, so we'll get started on those tonight anyhow. So before I go much further, I'll just bring up the slideshow part on the screen here. This big screen's much easier to use. So I'll just go across to a blank worksheet here. Now, at this point, don't open any worksheets up, but I'm going to go here to a blank worksheet in Excel 2013. And you might remember from class number 2, we had some data on screen. I can actually go in here on the Insert tab, and of course go in here and insert a table. Now, I actually did that work in class number 2. If your spreadsheet doesn't have any data, you can in fact just go in here and select a range like that, insert a table, and it actually goes in there and in fact adds column headings and applies a format for you automatically. Okay, and of course typically you'd have a range of data in Excel, convert it to a table, and of course that table there provides things, for example, like these filter drop-down lists on the right-hand side here, which provide information about stuff in each column. Okay, that's a table, and of course they're quite useful. So a pivot table is in fact, I guess, an extension of one of those sorts of tables. So in this class today, you might just remember that we had a table like that from class number 2. That's the first version of a table. We're going to now do a thing called a pivot table. And the third one today is in fact a data table. Now, this table here may be a table of data, but it is not a data table. What am I talking about? So on this page here, on the Insert tab, I just clicked on the one here called a table. That's it. I could in fact also do a pivot table. And over here on the Data tab, there's also one called What If Analysis, one called a data table there as well. So they're all different features in Excel, which you need to be sort of aware how they differ and what they do. Okay. So in summary, we did in week number 2 some work on a table. And that was really the process there of actually going INSERT, insert a table, which converted a normal range into a table in Excel, and it's done a very special way, and that's what transpired there. We also did some work previously on transpose. So of course the transpose feature makes columns into rows and rows into columns. Of course the transpose function could have been copy-paste special transpose. What am I talking about there? Okay, so once again, a few numbers here. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. I can go in here, I can copy that table, go over here, paste special, transpose, and there's my transpose data on screen. So in many ways tonight, when we talk about a pivot table combines features of a table like that, but also allows easy transposing of the data. Now you might ask the question, why is it called a pivot table? It's actually pretty hard to find the answer on Google because no one really explains such a basic answer. Why is it called a pivot table? Anyone know? Well, back in the world of Lotus 1-2-3, decades ago, we had data, and of course data was actually quite hard to rearrange for presentation purposes and for reporting. So one company developed a thing called a data pivot, and they in fact first developed this process, a thing called a data pivot. Microsoft became involved with Excel. They in fact developed a thing called a pivot table as one word, which has been, of course, copyrighted and trademarked. So a pivot table is in fact a proprietary name owned by Microsoft. It's really just a combination of a table like that, and you can easily in fact go in and do a transpose function, and in the sense that that transpose is pivoting rows into columns. The word pivot, of course, is really just switching between rows and columns and rotating things, but it's actually just a proprietary name, which sounds good, I guess. Now, why is it called Visual Basic? I guess it looks good, and it's just a good sort of marketing name thought up by people for selling products. Okay, I'll just close that one down, go back to my other computer for a short time now, and get underway with this presentation here. Okay. So I'll go through and explain these things in an example. We'll get back to these notes in a short time. So when we in fact insert a pivot table, it can be done two basic ways. And basically here on the screen, you'll see it can either be done as automatically done, or I prefer to in fact use this first technique here up the top. Okay. So what we'll do now is I'll just go across to the Class 7 workbook, or sorry, Class 6 workbook. When the workbook opens, it brings up a message on screen saying this workbook contains links to one or more external sources that could be unsafe anyhow. Basically, these links are linking to CSV files, which in fact mightn't even be on the computer, but when you do your assignment, you're required to in fact download data from Yahoo Finance as a CSV file, then use the data import wizard to in fact import the CSV file into a data area in the workbook. If you in fact do that process with the legacy links, you end up with data which first of all has a worksheet scope range name. There's also a link between the CSV file and the actual data file. So on this one here, I'll just click on the thing to close that down. But basically in this current workbook here, if I go to my data tab, here you'll see, for example, I've actually got connections, and on this connections link here, not the right one, there's two of these things. I can go in here onto, it could be that one, lose track. Somewhere here, there should be links in place. You can never find them when you want them, anyhow. If I go into the refresh area here, also not been very helpful, but you can in fact maintain links between the CSV files and the data. Okay, so I'll just get rid of this recovery part on the left-hand side. What's going on? I can't see that. Okay. So on the screen here, we've got tonight's workbook, and this workbook has got a number of worksheets. So let's just go in now and find the worksheet with the name of 100 records. This is the one we used, for example, in class number 2. It's actually been used a number of times. Also used it recently with the advanced filter. 100 records there on screen. Okay. So before we've actually gone in here and converted this into a table and made use of doing various filtering and all sorts of stuff. And just to refresh your memories for a short time, if I go in here, just watch, don't do it, I can go in here and in fact insert a table, and on the screen now there's my data in a table. I've got these drop down things here for filtering and sorting, and I can also go in here on my tables design tab and in fact apply table styles. I can do various selections here and also do other changes on the table. Let's go back here and then just convert it back to a range the way it was in the first place. In fact, I should in fact remove those colours there, but anyhow, back to a table. Control All, back on the home page here, apply a format of normal. Okay, so I'll just go in here now and actually convert this into a pivot table. So once again, put your active cell somewhere inside the data set and go to the Insert tab. We're going to go in now. There are two buttons here. One's called a pivot table, one's called recommended. Now, as far as I'm concerned, typically people at your level should be doing the first one, but let's just see what the second one in fact does, okay? So if we go in here in Excel 2016 and click on recommended pivot table, it automatically inserts a choice of pivot tables, okay, on the screen. So I can go in here and I can actually choose any of these combinations which are pre-selected for me. So I can do a comparison here, for example, of product A on the method of payment, product A of product B based upon, for example, the transport company, and there's a whole list there on the left-hand side. And some of those, of course, might be useful to you. So if you don't know what you're doing, that's a good place to start. Very good. So we won't do that because we can, in fact, do those things from first principles. I'll just click here on the cancel button. So instead, let's just go in here, put your active cell once again in the data region. Once again, this has got blank columns on the right-hand side, and down the bottom here, it's also got a blank row at the bottom. So basically, of course, it forms a data region. just go in here and click on, for example, pivot table, and it in fact brings up this first dialog. The first choice is to in fact make sure you've got the right data region. So it's already pre-selected my 100 rows here, my table range, that's where it's coming from. In most cases that would work fine. But let's suppose your table contained a blank row. If it contains a blank row, it only goes as far as the first blank. It wouldn't in fact go to the bottom part. So you might have to sometimes in fact select a bigger area there. We won't use any external data sources. This would typically be, for example, things like, for example, an Access database. Access used to be in the subject a fair while back. It used to take at least 6 hours to cover pivot tables and databases. So there's only so much we can cover, so it's been dropped out, but that's what would go in there. And down the bottom here, where it's going to, okay, I might put it today inside a new worksheet. And that's about all you need. So when you go in here and click on the OK button, it inserts a new worksheet and in fact adds the outline here for a pivot table. Okay, so basically now I've got these notes near you. I'm currently now on around about 1, 2, 3, slide number 5. Okay. So when you do that on a new worksheet, what do you see? On the left-hand side here is in fact a pivot table holder. That's all that appears there. It's a pivot table holder on the left-hand side. Up there on the ribbon, there's in fact a pivot table tools contextual tab with 2 sub-tabs. One's called Analyze and one's called Design. And on the right-hand side there is in fact a pivot table field area. Okay. Now currently my active cell appears here in the top cell of my pivot table holder. If I click anywhere outside this frame, like there for example, the contextual tab is gone and so has the field list on the right hand side. Click inside the holder and those areas come back. Okay. So basically, if we go to the right-hand side here, remember our database in fact had a number of columns, our tax invoice company. So those areas here are coming straight from my database. Where's it got to? Can't even find the thing. 100 records here. It's coming straight from these columns, so tax invoice company and so on. Okay. There they are on the right-hand side. And the whole thing's very, very straightforward. So in order to analyse the data, I can just click and drag and construct any report I desire within certain constraints. Okay, so let's suppose I want to in fact have different layers of information in relation to the states. I'll try and follow the handout I've given you on the website. So the first thing there is in fact producing this report. I'm going to in fact have something based on what we call a state filter. So I go to my list here of fields in the table. I scroll down and find the one called state. Where's it got to? Can't even see the thing. My screen's at the wrong angle. I'll make it like that. I can actually read the thing. So somewhere here, there's one called state. I just drag that state item down to my filter area. Just drag state down to filter. And when you let go, watch over there in cell A1. It automatically adds a state drop down to the top field of the worksheet. Okay. Now over the decades this interface has changed a bit. It hasn't changed that much because every time they change it they try and say this is different and they ask for more money, but anyhow it looks quite familiar over various versions. Hasn't changed that much actually. So there are a number of areas. There's one called filters, one called columns, one called rows. So columns and rows sound pretty logical. And in the example I've given you, I'm going to also go in here and you've got to depend upon what goes in the rows, what goes in the columns. It's really just like a choice of transpose. So in the example, I might go in here and drag salesperson, the salesperson field. I'll drag it down to my columns area. So salesperson's now in columns, and automatically there's columns there for the salesperson. And on the example here, I'll also drag the month down to the rows. And you can just drag them to any spot in the report that makes sense to you. I might put months down here in the rows column. Simple as that. And if you want to change them, just drag them between the boxes, which performs a transpose. It's just as simple as doing a simple click and drag on the items. Next important thing is what goes in the body. So in the body today, I might go in here and work on product A. So basically over here, typically the body would in fact add up. This uppercase sigma here, of course, means summation. So I'm going to drag product A down to the values area, and magically in the table now, information there about all of my salespeople in the database for the 4 months of data which appear in the database, and there's a summary of the information there on screen. As simple as that. And that's much easier than actually doing it with a table. Very good. But of course downtown some people might use tables, some people use pivot tables. You need to know what they are, at least have experienced these things in real life. Okay. So let's go to the top filter here. I'm currently here in state. Now on the drop down beside state, there's in fact a drop down. I can go in here and deselect all and just go in here, for example, and just click on, for example, Victoria. So click on Victoria, and there's a filter now of the data just for those salespersons there in Victoria over those months. Okay. And in the rows, I can go in here and also do a filter here on different months. There's, for example, September in Victoria, just sales for those particular people, and so on. Once again, when there's a filter in place, a little filter funnel appears beside the drop down. So I'll go back and show them all. I'll go back here and also show all of the rows there for all of the months. Right, and you can sort of drag and copy. You can also go in here and let's first of all look on the Design tab. So on the Design tab up the top here, many of these things are the same as what appeared for you, for example, on a table from class number 2. On the right-hand side, information here about pivot table styles. They're very similar to the ones available in a table. So I can go in here, for example, and change the colour scheme quite easily. And I can also go in here and do like banded rows and banded columns, depending upon the style, for example. So I'll go back to that one there. I can go in here and change the colour scheme by just clicking on that. Okay. Now we've covered subtotals in the previous class. You can also do subtotals here in grand totals. I won't demonstrate those today, but they're just things that you should be aware of. Okay. And that's all that happens. Basically, you might say, how do we spend 6 hours doing this in a normal class? We would actually link to a database and do other stuff in Access and well. But of course, why would you use an Access database? Access databases, of course, are what we call a relational database compared to a flat database in Excel. When Excel in fact has 65,000 rows, we used Access a lot for timestamp financial data. Excel now has 1 million rows, but of course things like business intelligence have in fact taken over more fully than databases these days. Anyhow, in the notes you've been given there, next there are 2 important points to talk about. In class number 2, I added a extra field. So let's go in now on this database. Let's go in here and work out, for example, product A multiplied by a certain value. So let's suppose each item of product A sells for $10. And that was done, for example, or previously in class number 2. Okay. It's actually called a calculated field. So if we go in here and in the calculations group here on the Analyze tab, item called Fields, Items and Sets. You need to be aware of a field. So let's just go in here and click on the Fields, Items and Sets option and then see a calculated field feature on screen. I'm going to in fact create a brand new one. So I'll just delete the word field 1 there by default. I might just call it prod A. You can actually put spaces in, so I'll call it product A dollars. Very good. And also on the list here is a list of fields already in the database. In the formula part here, just type in an equal sign. I'm going to multiply my product A column, and on the list down the bottom, just find the product A column. There it is, so product A is the column name. And when you click on Insert Field, it appears up there in the formula bar. Now when you used a table, of course, that in fact had square brackets around it. But in this area here, because it contains a space, it's contained inside single quotes. That's all that means. And the formula becomes fairly straightforward. So I've actually got my product A column, type in the star symbol, multiplication, so star 10, just star multiply by $10. So star multiply by 10, okay? Now if you're going to do a few of these, when you click on the Add button, that adds this new field to the list. It appears there down the bottom on the screen, okay? And when I click on the OK button, I can just close down that screen, and it automatically adds it to my values area. I've now in fact got sum of A and also sum of product A dollars. It appears there on the screen. To get rid of one, I might just get rid of my other one, just drag it. So to get rid of a value there, just drag it from the area, just dump it back there in the list and disposes of it, okay? So now on the screen you've actually got some information, but this is now in dollars rather than number of units. I know it's all a bit quick, but that's pretty enough to get you on the right track. Any questions so far? So it seems quite intuitive. But to point the way, can you use this thing in your first assignment? And the answer is, well, you can try, but it won't do the things you can do with a selector panel. It's just not that, selector panels are really customised to your own needs, whereas this thing is designed for people who really want to do a job quickly. They haven't been trained enough in Excel at the basic level, okay? Well, that's enough on that part. There's also a thing called a calculated item, which we don't use often, but the calculated field is quite useful. Now, the other important thing is that there are two more important factors. One is in the notes and one is not. So the one in the notes, in fact, involves a chart. So let's go in here and try and find the chart group from the Analyse area here. Oh, I've actually lost the thing. So actually here, one called a pivot chart. Now a pivot chart is in fact tied to the pivot table. So I've got my table here on screen. Click on pivot chart, and I'll just go in here and put in the default one on the screen. I'll put in the clustered column. Click OK. There it is on screen. Looks okay. I can also go in here and click in the background and move it to I can change its location. Where's the list gone here? I'm trying to find its location one. Can't quite see. Move chart. So I've right-clicked on the background there. Item called Move Chart. I actually move it here to its own spreadsheet. That in fact makes the thing a bit more clear on screen. Okay. So that chart's quite useful, and the most important part of the chart is it contains on the chart a number of drop-down items. I can go in here and do a filter on the actual chart itself. I can go in here and just show the information for my favourite salesperson called Wong. Mr. or Ms. Wong, there we go. There's the salesperson data for that item. You can go in here down the bottom and also change, for example, here the month, and also up the top there, go in and change the state, because those three are the current ones here in my filter things on the right hand side. You can drag in as many things in as you like. Just muck around and change the orientation and do many things. Okay, and that's all I want to cover. So there's no exam questions about pivot tables, but you know what they do. Okay. In the second assignment, in the open question part, some students, some semesters choose to do a pivot table in the second part of the assignment. Has to involve some VBA though. Any questions on that? Yes? What's your question? I haven't got my glasses on. Can't. Oh, there you are. I can see you now. You know, it's blurry.
So how to add in some of the production on the value?
Okay, so the values typically by default is the summation thing, and typically the summation would in fact work on products A, B, and C. Just go to your field area and just drag it down. So let's suppose you want to do product A over here. Just drag product A.
Oh, product.
Just drag it down to there, and magically
Okay. Okay, cool.
you can do A, B, and C if you wanted to as well. And you can also go in and group and do all sorts of weird stuff as well. So basically what we've done in the class tonight is explained in that handout. I've given you the demonstrations there. That's probably enough. So be aware that a pivot table or a pivot chart's useful. Yes. Another question. How hard's your question? I haven't recovered from your last question, have I, this afternoon? Anyhow. Oh, what?
It's just that it's still inactive. I mean, when I'm putting it in, I'm trying to calculate.
What did you do?
I didn't do anything, honestly.
Hit the escape key. If in doubt, press escape. Now, put your active cell inside that. Now what happens? So when there's a chart on screen, what can you in fact do up the top there? When there's a chart on screen, I don't know, well these things just happen, it's just bad luck. Yes?
If I change some data on the table, it will automatically update in the chart?
So if you change the table, the data in the table, no it won't. I haven't exactly checked, but in the past you must press the refresh button. It's just like a CSV file and a workbook. So back here, when you say you change the data in the table, if you go back, for example, and change the data here on this file, as far as I'm aware, well, in past versions it wouldn't update. I'm sure it's the same now. You have to go back to your pivot table area and go in here and click on the refresh button. Somewhere there, refresh. That in fact will in fact update. So you must click refresh to in fact update the data. Why would you do that, do you think? Why do you have to click refresh? So the reason you have to click refresh is that typically the data might be, for example, 6 million cells. If you change anything, you have to update every link. So it's a big database. You finish doing your alterations, click refresh, and there's just one update, which might take minutes, but it won't take minutes every time you change anything. Okay. So many big database things, you must press a refresh button to in fact update links between your data source and the database. Now I'm not quite sure if Google or whatever uses this stuff, but let's suppose you track information on a website about customers' preferences. You might have zillions of records to analyse the stuff. You might use a Power Pivot or something, or business or BI, just a quick update once and then run your reports every day or something. And it's big business these days doing sort of big data sets. So I won't do any more on a pivot table apart from do that. And once again, it might be of interest to you in your second assignment, but it won't be an exam question. So that's around about over half an hour spent on that. Now the next part here is a little bit hard to do on this computer, so I'll stay in the same workbook and go to this other PC. I'll stop groaning, but I'm feeling super worn out today. Don't know why. Oh. It's Father's Day this coming weekend, they tell me. My son's coming to visit. It'll be an experience. I'm sort of probably worn out from thinking about that anyhow. He's back from Africa in one piece. He's back from Sierra Leone, which I've told you before. I think he's Melbourne University mining graduate. Anyhow, let's get back to class number 6 on a different system here. This page is called Multiple Dynamic Vectors. And when it first opens up on the screen here, we've done a very similar thing before. And on the right-hand side, what do you see? You, in fact, see this is sort of like a validation. This is a selector panel with 3 different validation boxes here. On the right-hand side is a very short summary area. And over here is the work area, which in your assignment actually appears on a separate worksheet. So on the screen, the first task is, you've got these 2 areas here with the big red arrow saying, your task is to create these vectors. This will eliminate the hash name error. We have to go in here and create things like date V, price V, and volume V. Why? Because they are useful in your assignment. Okay. So where do you start? I'd recommend first of all going in and clicking on a cell which contains a name error. There's one there. Click on that cell. Look in the formula bar. What do you see? It's the minimum function applied to a name called price V. So the name price V might not be there. Now I could go to the name box and see if price V is there. I can't see it on that list, but in fact if price V is in fact a dynamic range driven by offset, it wouldn't appear in the name box anyhow. Okay? Because the name box typically only includes worksheet scope names of the current sheet or workbook scope names applied to range objects. Let's try a second technique. Let's go to the Formulas tab here and click on the Name Manager. In the Name Manager here, whole stack of stuff, pretty scary. Is there one in fact called Price V? No, there's not. Okay. Didn't quite hear what someone said. I don't know if they said there is or there isn't anyhow. Very good. So let's make this column slightly wider here. Now the idea is today we're going to show you a little bit differently. So in the class last week there's a date vector here. These dates today are in fact in ascending order. That area there doesn't have the name of date. So go to the drop down list here and just click on DATE, and date in fact goes as far as that record. Why? Because when you've got a certain number of days in the past here, if you select that date, there's enough space left to in fact return some information about the remaining dates down the page. Okay. Very good. So basically now, in the class last week, we had this date vector, and I talked last week about the importance of this very first cell being the anchor cell in the date vector. I gave it a gold colour background and said, that's important, okay? In the class this afternoon, in the first one this afternoon, I went in here and just highlighted a sample, around about 5 observations. So I'll make those ones in the class tonight have a green background. And I'll go over here and select the 7th of January. And there are 1, 2, 3, there are 5 here. So I've got 7th of January with 5. And basically over here, when I go in here and select the 7th, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So the 4th date there is coming over here from the thing called position. Of course, that uses the match function to try and find this first date here in my date vector. Okay. Other important parts here in relation to data 1 and data 2. I can also work here on data 1's price or data 1's volume. Anyhow, what am I going to do? I'm going to go in here first of all and create a thing called date V. And this is what you should also do in your assignment. I'm going to go in here in my work area, create a vector called date V. Date V is just short for date vector. Okay. So in the current example here, my date vector is going to be that area there shown in green. It's a 5 rows by 1 cell multi-cell vector. To make use of that, I need to summarise it somehow into a single number. I might just go in here and, in fact, apply the sum function. Now, when I sum those 5 cells, what number would you expect? Looking very intelligent. When I sum those 5 cells, what number roughly would you expect? And I'm trying to ask you, today's date is around about...
Price time volume.
Sorry?
Price time volume.
Price times volume? That's a good answer. Wasn't expecting that one. Anyhow, so today is around about 42,000 days since 1/1/1900. Okay? If you have 5 times 42,000, 5 times 42... 210,000, isn't it, roughly? I expect an answer around about 208 or something, 210. Rightio? So basically here, I'm going to go in and create a date vector. It's going to be dynamic. So I'll go in here, make this bigger on screen. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to in fact apply my sum function to a dynamic vector. Once again, it's going to be dynamic, driven by a selector panel, and use the offset function. Okay, the offset function is going to be anchored on the first cell in my date vector, and we know from last class that probably something like the index function serves the purpose quite well. There are other ways it can be done on my website, but this is in fact the most concise way. Index applied to date. First row, first column. That's my reference there. And then I want to start my date at the start of the green area, because the green area is coming from that function I showed you before. Where's it got to? I'm going to scroll up here and click on the one called position. That's in fact going to return the position of my first date. Of course, that cell there is actually coming from something like the match function, but of course the match function starts at 1, the offset function starts at 0, so I take away 1 to get them both into synchronization there. Okay. And in relation to the date, of course the date I'm referring to, my date V is always in the date column. Therefore, if date V is always in the date column, therefore the column offset will in fact be 0. And the number of cells in the green area, the height, of course, is going to come from here, that one in the selector panel called number in today's class. There are 5 observations there. Okay. That's all you need. So once again, we don't worry about the width. I just close my brackets there twice, hit the enter key, I will see a number on screen. And that number there, we would say before, around about 40,000 something or other by 5. So that looks about the right number. Okay. To be certain here, what happens when you go in here and select dates? If I go in here and select those cells, that's my current selection. Look in the status bar down here. There's in fact a date, 21 Feb 70, but it's in, I think, 5 centuries' time. Because if 40,000 is 1 and a bit centuries, 200,000 must be 5 times as many, mustn't it? Do you agree? Anyhow. Let's just do 2 more tests here in a second or two. Now what we're going to do now is, once again, in that cell there, get get CF. In that cell there, I've actually written that formula. So I've actually got my sum function applied to a dynamic range, anchored on my first cell here. The height's coming from my selector in the same column, and so on. So what you do now is go to that cell, enter edit mode. I'm going to go in now and copy the arguments to the sum function. So everything from the inside the first opening bracket to before the last closing bracket. Select those. I generally just do F2 home arrow keys in the formula bar. Go Control C, copy to the clipboard. Hit the escape key to return Control to XL. Go to the name manager here. Just click on a blank cell, make it a bit clearer. Click on a blank cell. Go to formulas, define name. Give it the name of date V, and of course date V is on my website everywhere. In your assignment, please use date V. The whole team knows what you're talking about. When I go to mark the thing, it's much easier for me to figure out what you are doing because of a common language here. It's called date V, and where it says refers to, get on the bottom here, just delete what's there. Delete. You must include an equal sign, first of all. So equals, then press Control V. Hit the OK button, and now go down here and type in equals the minimum of date V and the maximum of date V. And this time you can go in, select them both, go Control Shift hash, there's the dates there. So basically now it's much, much shorter, and over here, 7th to the 13th, in that green area, it should be going there from the 7th to the 13th. That's just verifying my start date and end date. So make sure in your work area you've got somewhere you're actually verifying that your dynamic vector, you can't in fact see the thing, you actually know where it in fact starts and ends on the screen. Any questions there? So obviously the date V is much, much shorter than in fact using offset, index, date, 1, and so on. Okay. So in order to make this work, we've got here, let's suppose the analyst selects that start date, that window height, this company. So basically the data is in fact always in the same band across the screen. So no matter how big it is, on something like this, if you've got your date V thing working properly, things like price V and volume V can be anchored to the date V vector. Okay, let's have a go at doing that next. Next important part here is, over here, the person in fact selects data 1 or data 2. Is it the first column or the second column? So over here somewhere is a thing in fact called company. That's in fact a match operation here based upon that selector finding the position where it appears there in S28. Where's S28? Not quite so. It must be over there in the somewhere here in this area. There it is, down the bottom here, S28. So this field here requires a thing called price V, and we're going to in fact work on price V next. So down here somewhere, I'll go in now. So I've created date V there, and I've done a test of it in those two cells. Let's now go in and create so in your assignment, you in fact need a date V, an open V, a high V, a low V, a closed V, and a volume V. You also need a date V, a return V. I don't know what else you need, okay? Now in your assignment, of course, you've actually got two summary sheets, which is a slight difference this semester. So will you have two date Vs, each with worksheet scope, or date V1 and date V2, which are different on each sheet with workbook scope? That choice is up to you, okay? Just makes the thing slightly different to other semesters. What am I talking about? So once again, my price fee is going to be, in fact, a multiple cell area here. I will go in first of all and just do a summary statistic based on the data. And this time, still dynamic, offset. And this time, I'm going to, in fact, anchor it onto my date v vector. So the reference here will, in fact, be date v, because date v has, in fact, got the right area across the rows. So date v is my anchor. And because date v is a slice across the page, I don't need to move any rows up or down. So I anchor onto date v, my rows becomes 0, and the price here for company 1 and company 2, so the price is coming over here from those two columns, so offset 1, offset 2, so those two are in fact coming from over here in a thing called company. That in fact gives me the columns, and the height is coming from date v, the width is coming from date v, so would you believe that's all you need. So to make the rest of these things work, you just do an offset anchored on date v, close brackets, hit the enter key. That should return a number, and that number on the screen, 1300, should be the sum of those numbers there. Doesn't seem quite right. It's 300. It must, in fact, we're actually on date 2. So in data 2, it's in fact doing that vector. And of course, that vector there sums to, would you believe, 1300. There it is on the screen down the bottom. Okay. You need any help? So actually, I've actually got, in my case, data 2 selected. Who needs some help? Anyone stuck? Okay, it's actually pretty straightforward now, so just go in now, and that one seems to be working okay. Just go to this area here, click on the formula, press F2 to edit, and go in here and select the argument to, once again, the summarising function called sum. Control C, escape, click on a blank cell, define name, price V, equals, delete what's there, insert an equal sign, Control V, click on OK, and go back now and watch what happened. Back here, magically, hopefully, there's the numbers. So for data 2, the minimum, 240, data 2, the maximum there, 280. It's actually working fine. Okay. If I go in here and make that data 1, we can see now data 1, 40 and 80, there's the starting point and the ending point. Nice, easy data, just to make sure that the thing is working. So in your assignment, to get it operational, first of all, I'd suggest using easy data, get it operational, then download the stuff and load it in and make it work. Because most people, it seems, download the data, import the thing, and start in a hard spot. It's really hard to know if you're actually on the right track or not, because all this really hard to interpret information. Are you right or wrong? Who knows? Okay. Now, basically, these ones here are 1 and 2. That's 1 and 2. This one's 3 and 4. How do you make a 1 into a 3? So 1 becomes 3. And 2 becomes 4. What's the pattern? Okay, have a go now at doing volume V. Volume V. Have a think about how it can be done in 10 seconds. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How'd you go in your head? Any ideas? So to make a 1 into a 3, you add 2. To make a 2 into a 4, you add 2. So it's actually the same as price V plus 2. So having thought about that logic there, one way is to go in here and go to your name manager and find price V. Now it becomes a little bit hard because it might have inserted the worksheet name. I'll just check out price V here first of all. What do I see? It's actually got this dynamic range here. It makes it a bit hard actually. So I'll do it from first principles. Might be a bit safer. I'll go in here. Create volume V. I'll go in here and go to the formula bar. They've all got range names, so I'll just go in here, Control C, Control V. I'll go in here, and in the company office, I'll go in here and add 2. It's as simple as that, I hope. So the volume is in fact 2 columns to the right of the respective data for the price data. So having done that, there's the sum of the data, so 5, 3. So basically on volume V, I'm in data 1 here, that vector there sums to 5300. Of course over here, somewhere there, 5300. How about that? So once again, just go back here, F2 into edit mode, go to the formula bar and copy and paste the argument to the sum function, Control C escape, go in here on a blank cell, define name, volume V equals Control V, enter, try it again, equals the minimum of volume V equals the maximum of volume V. And 1040, 1080 over here, 1040 and 1080. Get rid of the green background now, because once this is operational, you can't in fact see where it is. This is the trouble. So basically, if you can't see where it is, get rid of our testing development stage here. Of course, now the only way you can actually check out where you are is, I can go over here and make that, for example, data 2, go in here, different starting date, the 10th, different number of windows lengths here. So on that selection there, in fact, that 5 seems to be frozen. You're actually stuck here on 5. But with those dates there, so 2070, 2010, that's the same information over here. That's what I've just done. So 27, 2010, 27, 2070, 2010. So 2010, 2070. What's going on? The 10th of January. 10th of January for 5 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So that's the vector there on the summary. How about that? So in summary, just focus on creating a date V, but you've got 2 summary sheets. Decide if you want date V worksheet scope in 2 places, or date V price and date V returns or something. Date VP and date VR. I think I've written in the assignment just date VX or something. You've got possibly a different name there. Any questions? Right. That's all I want to show you on that one. So the main difference there is, once again, we've got this thing called date V. That date V, like that's going straight across the page there in that sort of fashion. So once you get the date V operational, these things here inherit the height from the reference or anchor vector in that relationship. And of course, this date V here will in fact be the vector driving the chart That's also why date V is useful to in fact anchor the whole thing. Okay. So when I look at your assignment completed work, back here in the summary panel, I should see something like, for example, the minimum applied to price V, not to some reference on the work area, because make sure this thing appears here on the summary sheet, then you're much more certain it's in fact correct. No less chance of in fact mucking things up. So if you're going to in fact do, for example, a price volume chart, then this price V here would in fact be the vector you would use in the chart. It's got two purposes. It's a summary statistic there. It's also the vector for the chart as well. Very good. I'm sure there's some questions, but no one seems to ask me very many during the class. And yeah, we'll keep pressing on though. Now in the same workbook, let's go to the very end here and look at something called price volume charts. So in your assignment, it talks about a thing called reversing V, the reversing V vector, to in fact get your charts going from descending order into ascending order. So after the class last week, I did a bit of a think about it on the weekend, and on this worksheet here, on the left-hand side, I've got some data in descending order. That's the first point. And this price volume data is purely made up. It's just based upon, for example, what's going on here? It's in fact based upon the previous cell and a random variable added to it. Anyhow, this is pretty easy data. So in the class last week we did a price volume chart, and of course this price volume chart is going from descending order data into ascending order here in the chart. Excel does it automatically, but it also of course brings back in the weekend breaks. So basically here, as we go forward in time up the page, the data is in fact getting smaller. There's the trend there on the screen. Now I can go in here and in fact change that vector from a date into a text, but it actually makes the data go backwards. And if I go in here now and reverse the order, I said to you last week, when you reverse the order, it changes one but not the other. That's much more clearly shown to you there in that example. So basically, if you in fact convert the dates to text and reverse the order, it reverses the order of one chart, not both. Now at one stage you could in fact work on an upper secondary axis, but it seems to have been dropped out in Excel 2016. You could in fact use a chart template from an earlier version of Excel, or you could in fact use a reversing vector to also solve the problem. But in the current assignment, although it mentions the word reversing vector, you can in fact do it another way, which is in fact easier. That appears here on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, there's in fact the same chart, the combo chart coming from the data set. And down the page here is in fact the same chart split up between the volume area and the price inside the one chart frame. It's really just a matter of copying and pasting and deleting things. So I started with two charts, and what did I do there? Well, I will go in here, for example. Look, I can go in here on my first chart. I can go in there and copy that chart over here on the right-hand side, Control V. Okay. Now, at this point, I can go in and drag down my border and do that to it, and also go in here and drag that part down. So I just went in here and changed the size to in fact make it look a bit better. And I can then go in and copy that inner part from there and paste it up the top here, Control V. If I drag it up, I've now got somewhere there. Oh, it's not very cooperative. I had much better luck last night doing this stuff on the weekend. Oh, I won't embarrass myself. You can in fact just extend it and paste it in. Okay, but you end up with charts like that, or you can actually do them in this style, which is similar to the one from Google. Just muck around. It's the safest way of doing this charting type stuff. Okay. But I actually did it in 2016, not here in 2013, so that might be another reason why It isn't quite working the way I hoped anyhow. Bother. Delete that. We'll go over here and I'll just copy that one. So go in here and copy that one. Control C, go over here, Control V. No, it's not been very cooperative. I've actually tried it in 2016, so it mightn't work in 2013. That's why I actually managed to get my reversing vectors working in that one. Anyhow, it depends upon the version of Excel you're using. Up to you. So in that summary part, just be creative. Try and show me how clever you are in producing interactive charts which look business-like. Very good. Any questions there? Oh, yes, sir.
What's the point between?
Sorry?
What's the point? What do we want to do?
We want to do a combined price-volume chart, okay? And because our data is descending, the chart must be ascending. Now, you could just simply resort the data and solve the problem, okay? But sometimes imagine that you're linked to a big database on a server somewhere, and you don't want to, in fact, be reversing it by resorting, because you've got this automated process doing data analysis. So because of the system, sometimes you're stuck with descending data. How can you easily make it go in the right direction for a chart? In 2010, I could actually do it. 2013, I got to my reversing vector. In 2016, reversing vector still works there, or a template. But doing that thing in the centre there, in fact, seems to solve the problem. Because if you make your dates and things date V's and price V's, they are dynamically linked to a database. That's what I'm trying to do. So it depends upon the constraints of the job. It's much easier just to sort the data. Problem solved in 10 seconds. But believe me, sometimes in the corporate environment, you have to comply with this data feed from someone. You can ask IT people to help you out, but from my experience, IT are good, but they become very difficult, and you have all these, conditions and contracts and 100 grand or something, transfer pricing, $1 million. I won't knock IT people too much, but if you work in finance areas, it's often better to do it yourself, I think. Any questions? It's 7:30. Let's have a 10-minute break. Any other questions? Then again, I might have went through there. Okay, it's 7:39 or 7:40. Let's get underway and recommence the class. Okay, so the next part here is a worksheet called what if analysis. And basically on this area here, there are three different things called scenario manager, goal seek, and one called a data table. So basically this thing called a data table, we had a thing before called data, on the insert tab, one called insert table. That's one sort of table. We can also insert a pivot table, but a thing called a data table is in fact a different thing again. Okay, and we're going to show you these things now. Now, these, we didn't spend very much time here, but of course these things appear typically on the data tab over here in the what if group. And they have, of course, got combined in around about, I think, Excel 2007, they appeared there in the one group on screen. Okay. This page here contains some background as to what's going on. I won't read through the main points there, but basically sort of what if. You know, what if we change something? What's the impact on the answer? Or if we want to achieve a certain answer, what do we need to do to in fact arrive at that result as far as, you know, like dollars and cents are concerned? So basically the first one here, they're best shown here by an example. There's a page here called What If Example on the screen. These are pretty corny examples here. The first one here is the thing called Winnendoo tractors. And every semester I ask the question of the class, has anyone here ever heard of a place called Winnendoo? And I'll generally expect to hear the answer of silence. We say no, never heard of it. But last semester, in semester one, a person said, yes, I know where it is. Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather sort of thing. I just couldn't believe how this person had heard of Winnendoo. And it turned out he was actually doing a forestry degree here initially, doing, you know, finance secondary. And it turned out he in fact knew a person who had done forestry with my son, who was actually doing engineering here about 15 years ago. And because he was doing forestry, he actually went to a place called Kawawea, and Kawawea is in fact near Winnendoo. Well, before I start this story, I generally in this class spend 2 minutes diverting slightly. I'll go in here to a web server, and it's about tractors. So tractors, Tractors, .Winnendoo. I actually own the website address, winnendoo.com, would you believe? Winnendoo. Enter. Bing! This is a pretty old website. It hasn't been changed for 14 years or so. But on the screen here are several pictures I will draw to your attention. That one there is a picture of a tractor, would you believe? It's got, steel wheels and a shadow of, that shadow there is in fact the shadow of my father taking the photo around about 1948 or something, a long time ago. He was taking that photo there at a place called Winnendoo in Gippsland, 200 kilometres east of Melbourne. Anyhow, that's the first picture I'll show you. I'll show you three more. Next picture here is the same tractor with different tyres now, a long time ago as well. And on the seat there is a young bloke, about 3 or 4, who of course is me, at Winnendoo in Gippsland on this tractor, my father's tractor. And my father in fact died when I was 12, a long time ago. It's a long time since he passed on. Anyhow, I still own the tractor, I still own his truck, and I'm still paying registration on a truck which is now 65 years old. I still pay registration. It hasn't been on the road for decades, but I still pay registration on his truck. I still have my father's car and all sorts of things. I'm a very sentimental person, it turns out. Anyhow, that same tractor there, just close that down, that same tractor was, in 2003, it was sort of brought back to life by me and my son. That's the first stage there. One more picture here, there's the same tractor there getting painted. I can in fact spray paint and things. I'm a pretty versatile person. And second last picture here, there's the same tractor, would you believe, with me on it in almost the same spot during the drought of 2003. It didn't rain for a long time. And of course, when it didn't rain in Victoria back then, what happened? The Victorian government decided to build Southern Hemisphere's largest desalination plant. Okay, call the contracts. What's the what if? You know, how much do we need? Sign the contracts. Start digging. It began to rain, and didn't stop for about a year. Biggest floods ever after that. So anyhow, the story was, of course, we built this desalination plant. I won't get too involved in the politics there. And the last point there is on that one. Last one. Is there one more picture or not? Oh, I don't know. Not really. There's my son doing something to it, washing the thing. I never actually finished the paintwork. I ran out of time, but that's the story about Winnendoo. So basically here, we've got a file called Winnendoo Tractors, and here is in fact some sales information here. Now, of course, these are pretty small numbers because a tractor costs a lot of money these days, and of course, this company here has got sales forecasts for tractor sales over the next 3 quarters in various regions of Victoria. Gippsland is in the east, Mallee sort of northwest in the sort of the dry area, Wimmera and Western Victoria. And the basic question here is, so if I go in here and I will click on that cell and go to my formulas tab and click on a thing called trace dependence. Okay. So click on trace dependence in that area there, and that cell of course links to those items. Okay. So if you in fact have a worksheet, not quite sure how it works, you can in fact use a thing called formula auditing. That picture appears in the very last worksheet of class number 5. It's not very important, but that's in one way to figure out how the worksheet in fact is working. So basically here, in this current example, I can go in here and click on remove arrows to get rid of that overlay. If I click on any cell here, those cells there contain the previous number and a growth figure. So some analysts figured out, in a certain environment, certain scenarios, these are the growth figures between each quarter for tractor sales in this company. Okay. Now in Victoria, what factors influence tractor sales? There is in fact a Victorian Tractor Dealers Association website. You can go there and look at their forecasts. But basically in Australia, a lot of tractor sales to farmers are of course driven by the weather. Okay. So the weather forecast might be an important factor in how sales might change. Okay. So what if we in fact had different growth figures here? What would the impact on monthly sales here and also the annual overall figures at the end? They are called scenarios. Okay. So basically in this current worksheet there are no scenarios currently, and of course this word scenario, after my experience in the class this afternoon where most people didn't twig between scenarios here are the same as the scenarios in your assignment. Okay, how are they done? I can go in here and click on these different growth figures here, go to my data tab and go in here and click on what if, and then activate the thing called the scenario manager. It's really like an automated version of data validation. So basically in your assignment you're in fact using a selector panel with validation and things. It's a better way of actually doing this stuff. But if you don't know what you're doing, this is a good place to start. So let's just go in here, for example, and click on Scenario Manager. It's currently blank. I will go in here and add a new scenario. Now, if it's going to be based on the weather, I might just call it normal. In other words, over the next year, average rainfall. Okay, so obviously in Texas currently we've got a super wet season there. How does that influence tractor sales? A bit extreme because you're probably washed out and you mightn't even be alive to in fact buy a tractor, but sometimes of course these extreme events are harder to predict. So in this case here I've given it a name by changing these cells here, so B17 to B20, this is my current area. I'll go in here and click on OK. I'm going to add one, and now there's the values coming from my current scenario. I can go in now and add a new scenario. I can go in now and add one, for example, let's just call it so once again, what are the weather forecasts here? Of course, just go to the Bureau of Meteorology and actually see what they are forecasting for the next 12 months. And of course, this weather forecast is in fact pretty important in farming. Okay, so what do we mean by below average? Let's suppose in here it's going to be, for example, 30% below average. In other words, it doesn't mean a drought like 2003. Because in Victoria in 2003 it was pretty bad. Up there in Ballarat, they've got a big lake in the city of Ballarat, and in 2003 it dried up. In fact, they had grass fires in the lake for a year or two. It was just so dry. Okay. In Melbourne, you know, pretty bad, running out of water. Lots of restrictions took place. So I'll go in here and click on OK. Now let's suppose if we have a drought, what's the tractor forecasts in Gippsland? Well, Gippsland in fact has a lot of irrigation for dairy farming. We ignore the fact that dairy farming is going broke anyhow for other reasons, but typically there's irrigation water there, so it mightn't really matter. But in 2003, in fact, irrigation water couldn't be bought for any money. Okay. And I in fact own an irrigation licence, and for the first time ever, you couldn't get any water at all. Just zero water was available for irrigation. But in a normal season, that shouldn't matter. Up in the Mallee, of course, if it doesn't rain there, things are pretty bad. So we might in fact have a sales growth of, say, minus 10%, minus 0.1. In the Wimmera, they grow sheep there, mightn't be much sheep fodder. Let's make it here about 0.02, and let's make the Western District a little bit lower. Well, these numbers here are coming from the analysts. You've got to have some sort of model to work them out, but we're just going to put these scenarios in first of all, and click on, let's add the next one. Next one here is going to be for a good season. In a good season, what do we say here? Now, we don't want 150% above average. We just want something which is better. So let's just say here 40% above. We don't want, in fact, like a deluge like we had after 2003. When the drought broke, you know, the Lockyer Valley in Queensland got washed away. Lots of people were killed by floods, for example. Okay, one extreme or the other. In Gippsland, I'm on a creek called the Rainbow Creek. It rose about 20 feet with the floods up down there. It's pretty scary stuff sometimes. So basically in here, once again in Gippsland, it won't matter much because there's irrigation. But what about the Mallee? It depends upon when the rain falls. Okay, so if there's a lot of rain in winter, it's so wet you can't plant the crop. But typically, of course, if there's a lot of rain in Australia because of El Nino, there's less rain in North America. So if the North Americans have less rain, the corn crop is down. It also means here there's more crop and also better prices on a world market. So let's suppose in here in the Mallee it increases by, say, I don't know, 15%. And the Wimmera, it's going to increase here by, I don't know, 0.12, just to put some numbers in. That's enough numbers, and click on OK. We've actually finished those scenarios. So there on the screen here, there are those scenarios. I can just close that down. So basically now, we can go in now and click anywhere on the sheet, go to our scenario manager. They're saved in the workbook. Go back here and click on, for example, below average. With that scenario there, click on show, and those numbers in the background here, in fact, it'll change those numbers there and change it. Click on show, it in fact flows through and actually puts those numbers in. Or click on, for example, good season, click on show, and they show there on screen. So it's just like an automated version of data validation with indirect driving data sets. That's all it's doing. So basically, when do you need scenarios? If you're doing a loan for a customer, working at a bank, different interest rate scenarios, different market outlook, you should be able to work out the sensitivity of the loan defaulting, for example. So what if things go bad? What's the impact on the bottom line? So in summary, that's all you need to know. You can in fact do other stuff here, but so it's often used, for example, in loan evaluation, I would hope. and just sort of different preset outlooks there for different spreadsheets. But once again, you can actually do it more easily, I believe, with data validation, indirect and other things in your assignment. But in your assignment, you're meant to do a portfolio which involves several scenarios, and basically it's given to you here on this page, so page number 9. Got some cash in bank, different scenarios here. Scenarios, you give them a name, and you weight the stocks between various groups in different sectors here and in them all, and that pops the money at the end, okay? So I've got a self-managed super fund which is run through Macquarie, and we've got a cash management account there. It's just like what it appears in a report like that. You cash at the start, buy some stocks. During the period, certain dividends come back into the account, and you cash at the end. And this interface, it's just a way of trying to demonstrate how it's done, and something vaguely related to what happens in practice. Okay, that's what we're doing there. That's enough on that one. Next one's called GoalSeek, and it's been around for a fair while. I used to have a thing called GoalSeek with charts, which I actually enjoyed a lot, but Microsoft canned that feature. You can't do GoalSeek with a chart anymore, unfortunately. It used to be quite good. The first one here is pretty straightforward. So on the page here, we actually buy something, we get certain cash flows in the future, and with a discount rate of 10%, those cash flows end up being here, that NPV. It actually says IRR here, that just means discount rate. Now, on this machine here today, last semester on both of these computers in both laboratories it wouldn't work. In the class this afternoon on level number 6, at this stage my computer did strange things, but it seems to work on these other ones that you students are using in here. So the question is, pretty basic here, let's suppose we want to have an NPV of $8,000. What discount rate would we need to in fact achieve an outcome of 8,000? Obviously these cash flows here are normal, cash outlay, cash inflows. There's only one change of sign here. And of course to make the NPV go down, of course the discount rate of course must be higher than 10%. So basically here, I click on the cell which contains a formula which is linked to all of those values. You might ask why it doesn't have the NPV function. Is the answer the fact that NPV function doesn't work with Scenario Manager, with GoalSeek? I can't quite remember. I'll check it out during the weekend. So I'll go in here and select that cell there, okay? I will go to my Data tab, click on What If Analysis, go in here and click on GoalSeek. So when I go in here, I'm going to set the cell which contains the formula to the value of $8,000, 8,000, by changing the cell which has discount rate linked to the formula, okay? So having done that, when I press the OK button, it should get an answer around about, say, 12.5 or 13%. But in the class this afternoon, and last semester in all classes, the whole 4 classes last semester, when I press the OK button on this machine here, things didn't go well. Anyhow, I will try it out. Click OK, what'll happen? What's it doing? 0. Okay. Now when I go back here and click on OK, go to that cell, and my formula has gone. Dear Ian, GoalSeek destroyed my formula. Dear Ian, I don't know why. It happens on the lecture of machines in this building. Blame IT. That's why I say don't trust them. You know, they're dangerous people. It worked for you okay? Anyhow, this is the problem. Any questions? Look, a much more useful way is to go to the right-hand side here and look at the next one based upon the Black-Scholes option pricing formula. We know that in the Black-Scholes option pricing formula, it involves 5 input numbers. The stock price, which you can observe in the marketplace, the exercise price on the option, which is part of the options contract. This one here is the risk-free rate, far too high, we know, but we'll leave it at 10%. And of course, the option expires on a certain date. This one here, of course, we need the volatility of the underlying stock over the expiry, over the time to the option's expiry date. That's pretty hard to forecast, okay? So basically here, given those numbers, this is the theoretical price coming from the option contract. That cell there contains the Black-Scholes option pricing formula written there with references rather than range names. It's really hard to read that formula. It's a nightmare written that way, okay? So basically here, the question is, if you don't know the current sigma, you can in fact work out implied volatility. So a better feature of goal seek is to in fact use to work out implied volatility. So let's suppose you know the current observed option price there of 3.9134, but you don't know sigma. You can in fact use goal seek to in fact work out the answer. Now in this current formula here, if I go in and make sigma 0, of course it gives a divide by 0 error. It's a bad place to start, okay? Now generally when you're doing the simulation stuff, you can in fact make that a very small number, like about 0.0000001. That's also not very good, okay? So you're better off saying, well, volatility is probably around about 10% or 20. Just put in something which is a bit closer to the answer. Put in 10% here. So to make this work, you click on the cell once again, which contains the formula, that cell there. Now once again, I'll go in here, I'll click on what if analysis, goal seek. I'm going to change that cell to my observed price, 3.9134, by changing the cell which feeding sigma through to the formula. So I'm going to set F29 to the observed option price, 3.9134, by in fact changing volatility, because once again, sigma in the formula can't be solved analytically, it must be solved by trial and error numerically. You can't in fact solve the equation for sigma in algebra, for example. Now on this screen here, when I go in and click on the button, that number there should be sort of iterating towards 30%. But on this computer, it might not work. So that number will change. Just watch what happens. Click on OK. Well, that number's changing, so the price has changed. Actually, it did work that time. Amazing. If I went in here, for example, and actually started here at was it Robert? It was actually 30% before, wasn't it? What did I have before? I can't remember. Yeah, why did it come to 10 on mine? What, did you get 30 on yours? Yeah. Sorry?
I didn't change it. But
Oh, what did you get?
It was 30, yeah.
Yeah, and it came back to 30?
No, it didn't.
Oh,
Just,
we put it back.
Just try it out. You've got to try it. Actually, once again, my formula is gone. The formula has vanished. So this is just a dodgy computer I've got. I don't know. It's when this used to be in a proper laboratory, at one stage, university provided everyone with a desktop computer a few years ago. And in that 66-seat room, in the centre, there were 3 or 4 computers all side by side, and he said, stay away from those PCs. They're dangerous. Things just go wrong. You know, things don't work. Rightio. So in summary here, you can in fact use goal seek to work out implied volatility. Another way of doing the same thing is use a thing called solver. Now I won't do solver until we'll do it later in the semester in the VBA section. Any questions? Okay. And if you're doing a derivatives subject, you've probably done it in derivatives anyhow, I would imagine. Have you? Yes. Derivatives? You've done derivatives?
No, next semester.
Oh, okay. You'll probably do it there anyhow. You should. Next one's called a data table. So basically here, we've got a loan. My device has gone flat, unfortunately. In this example here, we've got a loan of $100,000 repaid monthly over 10 years at an interest rate of 1% per month. And in this cell here, is a formula based on, of course, the PMT function, of course, is we're working out the payment here for an annuity. Okay. So basically here, I will go in and just copy those things down the page to a blank area here, because you're pretty clever people. I can work at the same thing quite easily from first principles. I can go in here, for example, what if I in fact repay it over a different number of months? So let's suppose I go in here and pay it over 5 years, 6 years, and so on. So I can go in here and just make that vector get in the page here for repaying the loan over a different number of years. There was an article in the paper this week about what happens if you get a housing loan from a bank of the average amount and you decide not to buy a coffee every day. What's the impact on your housing loan? Any ideas? Well, a cup of coffee is about $4, isn't it? $4 off your housing loan every day. You pay it back about 3 years earlier and you save about 30 grand in payments. Okay, so big difference. So on this page here, let's have a go at doing the PMT function for an interest rate here of 1% per month. And as I drag down, it has to always be in that cell, so I'll make that there absolute. My number of periods here, 120, make that absolute. Actually, that's wrong, because my number of periods here, of course, is coming from the cell on the left. And my amount borrowed here, the PV, of course, is coming from that cell absolutely. Do that, drag it down. That's a schedule there of what's going on. And for 120 months here, that 1434.71, of course, is the same as those numbers up here. So that's doing the process there by just a straightforward formula with copy and paste. Have a go at doing the same thing now with an array formula. Have a bit of a think about how you might do it. So let's repeat the process now with an array formula at the next stage. Okay. Have a think for about 10 seconds or so. So with an array formula, I've got a vector here, which is, in my case, that vector there is 9 rows by 1. So I'll go over here and select a 9 row by 1 vector, okay, equals PMT, short for payment of an annuity. Here it is after, for example, the rate, my rate cell. Probably should make it absolute again, just to be on the safe side. My number of periods here is coming from a vector, and the amount borrowed here is coming from that one. Probably should make it absolute as well, just to be on the safe side. Okay. Press Control-Shift-Enter. There's the same answer there on screen, and that's how it's done there as an array formula. And the main difference here is, of course, it contains the brackets at the top and done that way. And of course, just to repeat, an array formula is meant to be sort of a pretty advanced technique, and it's often, in fact, done after VBA because it's actually hard for many people to understand how it works. But anyhow, that's how you would do it with an array formula. So that's what we can do in the subject. We already know how to do that, but for people who don't know how to do, for example, a thing like that with referencing it done the right way, or an array formula, we actually use a technique up here called a data table. Okay, so on the right hand side is the information here from a help file. I can either have the table here in a column format or have the table here in a row format. And if the column is in a column orientation, the formula is one cell above and one cell to the right of the column of values. Now, as far as instructions go, that's the most confusing, vague thing I've ever read. Type the formula one cell above and one cell to the right of the column of values. So that's the formula there. So working backwards, where are the values? So they are one row below and one column left. So based on that logic over here, the values start in that cell. So let's type in, for example, 5 years, 6 years, and then just drag that down. Now I've got the background here just to make sure you're all on the same page. I'll get it as far as that. So once again, I've got my formula here, and the values start with respect to that formula. And this part at the top, this part here, it doesn't matter where it is, that can be anywhere. But the important part is the formula and the first value. Okay. Quickly moving on, that's what that's all about. And I can go in now and I can actually select my formula and my vector of values. Just select the formula cell and my vector of values. This is for people who don't know what they are doing. Okay, so once again, a long time ago when people sort of sold you life insurance, had real people rather than TV ads, they would sort of come to you and sort of say, well, if you spend this money into life insurance, you'll be worth 50,000 in 50 years' time. Anyhow, back 50 years ago, 50 grand was worth a fortune. Of course, these days, 50 years later, poof, just a basic car, isn't it? Anyhow, having done that, let's now go to the data tab here, click on what if analysis, data table, and basically this data is in a column, so that column feeds through to that cell. So the column of payments there feeds through to the cell which contains 120. And basically now, when you click on OK, it magically does the thing for you. Just change the format here, let's give it some dollar signs in that area there, so make it a bit better. Whoops, I didn't do that properly. I'll just copy that format down. So basically here, there's the 120, and there's a vector there of repayment amounts. Look in the formula bar, they all contain curly brackets here. So once again, if I go in here and try and change a number, rather than saying you cannot change part of an array, it tells me here you cannot change part of a data table. It's really just a simple way of actually inserting an array. So basically, what we have got here, it uses a table function. It's very, very similar to what we did over here with that thing as an array, but it doesn't require CSE or selecting the right size target. Pretty straightforward. Okay, the final one today is that's doing the thing here for one variable, just one number here. Let's have a go now doing one now for two variables. A little bit different. This time we put the values in the same column below the formula. So basically here, I can either do any of those three in 2 dimensions. So I'll go in here, I'll just once again go in here and do months. Whoops, just complete that vector there. My mouse isn't working very well. I'll put my vector there. This time it's under the formula. And over here, I might in fact borrow 50,000, or I might borrow, for example, 100. There's my 2 seed values there. Just go to the fill and drag to the right. And of course, these days, property in Melbourne's pretty expensive, and obviously there, having a thing of around about $500,000 is much more realistic. So I'll go in here, click on Format, Auto Fit Column Width. It goes there as far as borrowing $650,000, of course, to buy your apartment or whatever. It's actually pretty expensive these days. So I've set out both of those 2 ones. So, no, I could do any 2. Now, I could have in fact done, for example, number of payments and different interest rate scenarios here. Once again, select the formula and the data areas. Go in here. This time, go onto what if analysis. And this time, once again, my row inputs of the rows here are the amount borrowed. So my row input cell is in fact the one here relating to the loan principal. And the column input here is relating to the number of payments. Make sense? So the rows, in this case, is the amount borrowed, and the columns are coming from the number of payments. Click on OK, and it automatically creates an array formula. And so once again, 120, 100 grand, that one here, that's the same cell as that one. Once again, it's a table here. You can't change any value. It's part of a table, like part of an array. So I didn't mention in the class this afternoon, but back on my website here, somewhere here in resources, in class number 6 here, there's in fact an exercise called the exercise there is in fact based upon a previous exam question, and that involves what we've just done. Now every semester people spend a lot of time trying to figure out that question before the exam. Again, how do you do it? How do you do it? Well, we'll go in here. There's the answer. It shows you the answer there in each one already. They're already shown to you there. But people still keep asking me, how do you do it sort of thing? And I sort of wonder, is it on the exam or not? You spend a lot of time trying to figure out that question anyhow. That's just an example of an exam question. The reason that's on my website is, at one stage, it used to be on a practice exam paper, and I didn't provide the solutions one semester, and the year I was away sick in 2015, a commercial website, I won't mention their name, has actually got that solution from a student on their website, and they charge money for it. And in 2015 people complained, Ian, we've done your subject, why do we need to pay money to buy the answer? And my answer would simply be, you're a master's student, can't you work it out? Can you get on Excel and actually work it out before the exam? Okay, but anyhow, to cut off the commercial provider, there's the answer and questions provided for free to the whole world. It's actually publicly available to stymie operators charging money for copyright material. Bit of a problem there anyhow. I will say no more. Back to the class tonight. So we have done a data table there. It is not the same as a table, not the same as a pivot table. It's called a data table. And that's the data table done the easy way. You also do a data table we'll call it high power. Now, I mentioned in class number 1 that in this area of spreadsheeting there's a thing called Model Off, and Model Off is the World Championships in Financial Spreadsheeting. It was quite a good place once, but now it's been sort of more commercialised, so if you're involved in actually doing it this semester, be careful you don't sign anything, because I'll try and get your money. It only costs you about $30 to in fact enter as a student, but be careful of being sold stuff. So basically here, Model Off in fact has a lot of different competitions for students. One's often based on games of chance. And if you in fact enter Model Off, they've got their past questions on a website. You can go there and download the question, open it up, and virtually says, here's the question, you've got 20 minutes to in fact figure out the answer. And the answer to a game of chance question, like you're playing a game of cards, and what's the probability of you getting a certain monetary return on playing cards? You might say, why is that important in finance? Well, in finance, the probability of certain outcomes is very similar to the probability of outcomes in card games or any sort of betting, for example. Okay, so basically here, you can in fact use a data table. And to explain this story, let's go in here and include a random number. Now, I don't have my wallet here tonight, but I'm good for my word. So if we go in here and draw a random number on a computer, if you have the same number as me, say bingo, and I'll write in your name, and next class you'll get from me $50. $50, okay? Very good. So we're going to go in here and type in equals RAND, open, close brackets. It's the RAND function with no arguments. And when you press the enter key, you will see a number. If it's the same as mine, you've got 3 seconds to say, bingo, I'm pretty safe. There's the number. It's a 1 in a million sort of chance, I think. I'm always pretty safe. But once again, in about class number 8 or 9, there is a chance to, in fact, get some money. It won't be $50, but you'll get some money, at least for coffee, from me possibly that night. Okay, if you're first to, in fact, say the answer. Okay, so once again, what am I talking about here? That's a random number drawn from a distribution. And if I go in here and press the F9 key, the F9 key, will in fact update that number. If I press F9, that number is changing. If I hold it down, it's in fact making that number tick over like that. So basically, in a spreadsheet, if you have a random number in a cell, if you change anything or press F9, that number updates. So what am I talking about here? You can in fact use a data table to in fact automate the F9 generating process. So you can use a data table to in fact use that updating in a game of chance. Okay. And if you ever go to the website and look at the solution, you in fact have a blank cell, which is in fact here on a data table, and that cell there is in fact referring to a blank cell, that one there. And so people say, what's going on? How can that work? Behind the scenes, it's really just automating the F9 recalculation process for a game of cards or something like that. So we'll say no more. Now I've actually got a website page about that. It's not available currently, but I'll switch it on again soon. But don't get too bogged down. Unless you're going to compete in Model Off, don't get too fussed about that. Okay. That's enough about what-if analysis. The next part now is going to move on to this area called random numbers. I've already introduced a random number here. Let's go to this worksheet next. Okay. So in relation to random numbers, these are used a lot in finance, and also they're used a bit, for example, in doing things like auditing, trying to sample transactions randomly for audit purposes. There are two basic functions here. One is in fact called RAND. That's a 0-1 distribution number, and this one here is coming from the bell-shaped curve. We're going to go through two examples in the class tonight. Let's have a go here at doing number 1. I'm going to generate two vectors of numbers from a uniform 0-1 distribution. What does that mean? I'll go down here and just type in uniform, U, open bracket, between 0 minimum and 1 maximum. So when I draw a random number, it'll be somewhere between those two numbers with equal probability, so the distribution is flat. Any number has equal chance of being drawn. I'll go in here and give the first one the name of x1, which of course is in fact a cell address. I'll go in here and call that x1 dot. And I'll put in a bit of, I'll just drag that down. I'll leave about 6 rows blank between that heading and my data. Also do an x2 dot. Okay. So I'm going to generate two vectors of numbers from this distribution. And to do this quickly, I'll click on my first cell here. I'm currently here on E34. I should probably do about 100,000 rows, but on a lot of computers that's far too many to just slow things down. So let's imagine there's 100,000. Let's just do 100 rows. I'll go in here. I'll go from E34 colon to F134 will do. I'll select that range of cells there. So I'll put in the address, the coordinates up there in my name box. The first cell, colon, add 100, 1 column to the right. I'll go in now and type in equals RAND, open, close. This time I want to put it in every cell. I'll just go Control Enter, not Control Shift Enter, but let's just go Control Enter. And now magically, there's my formulas there in each cell. Once again, that cell there's like we did before. It's just simply a random number from a 0-1 uniform distribution. I'll just go in here. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to do the minimum, the maximum, the average, and the standard deviation. I'll just do it here on my first vector. So I'll go in here now. I'll just in fact select my labels and the data. I will go in here and apply a name. Now once again, x1 dot is in fact the first vector, including that, and so on. Okay. So I'll go in here. I will apply the minimum function to my x1 dot vector. I will copy that down. So once again, the minimum here is close to 0. Next one here, make that one the max. The max, of course, should be close to 1. The average, of course, should be close to 0.5. And, of course, the standard deviation, not quite certain. It's probably around about 0.3. So the standard deviation of the sample there, sort of close to 0.3. That's on one sort of simulation. If I press F9 again, it updates. That's my next drawing of random numbers. So pretty close to 0 minimum, pretty close to 1 maximum, close to 0.5 average, and close to 0.3 standard deviation. I asked the question in the class this afternoon, the first one. So how do I know that those numbers are in fact random? What features in statistics help me to identify a random number series? How do you in fact check for randomness? Now someone was doing derivatives next semester. Have you done statistics recently?
No.
Oh, okay. How many?
Investments.
Oh, okay. How do you check for randomness? Have a bit of a think. Talk to your colleagues there. Come on, randomness. How would you check for it? So when you've got a stock portfolio, we know that a portfolio, the ups and the downs are important. How do you measure the ups and downs of the portfolio? Did it recently. VCV, variance covariance matrix, or correlation might be important. So correlation is standardised. Let's just work out now the correlation between those two vectors. So just go in here, equals the correlation statistic applied to x1 dot, comma, x2 dot, comma, and those two there should have a correlation close to 0. So once again, that's the correlation between those two. Once again, correlation is standardised. It's between -1 and +1. Pretty zeros, of course, no co-movement. Of course, the other way, of course, is to look at autocorrelation, how they, in fact, vary down the page in an autocorrelation basis. We can't, in fact, there's no function in Excel to, in fact, return autocorrelation without, in fact, doing some sort of formula. Very good. Another way to, in fact, work at the answer, in fact, here is, now, once again, in this page here, we're required to go in here and calculate summary stats. I've actually done just minimum and maximum and a few. I haven't, in fact, done skewness and kurtosis. Also, I can do an XY scatter plot. Let's try that one next. Let's just go in here and select both. We'll just select the data. Select those two data series. Go up the page and go in now and insert this time an XY scatter plot. There it is on screen. Now, you've got to go in here and change the axes. Just click on the axes here. Just make it go there from, for example, 0 to 1 on the horizontal, and on the vertical one here from 0 to 1 as well. Close that down and just make the chart here square. So when you go in now and press the F9 key, those dots update. That's on a pairwise basis. That's the relationship between each number there on a pairwise. So basically, that coordinate there has a spot there on a dot in the chart somewhere. Okay. So press F9 it updates. So basically, if there is no correlation, you should see no pattern on screen. Can you see a pattern? Anyone? Who reads tea leaves? Anyone? You just won't say you do, but anyhow, some people read tea leaves, they say, or clairvoyance or something, anyhow. They may see a pattern, but generally, of course, you can't see any pattern there in the data. So another way is to, in fact, do an XY scatter plot of those points. You're actually required to do an XY scatter plot in your assignment. And in the assignment, when I get to market some semesters, I open it up and there's the scatter plot on screen. And what do I see? I go in there and I see something like, where'd it go? That wasn't very good. I pressed the wrong button. Click that chart. I'll go in here and I'll change my chart type to one of those. I see that and I say, whew, what does it mean? Anyhow, so for XY scatter plot in finance, you don't join the dots. Now you might in fact see sometimes a picture of your cat there somewhere, but it's pretty unlikely to in fact see your cat there on a random series. Anyhow, I'll go in here and make that back in there to the normal one. I should in fact just have one of those, just the dots by themselves. Okay. So basically that's what we're doing there on the first one. Let's go a little bit further now. Basically in finance, we often assume, of course, that the stock returns are coming from a normal bell-shaped curve. So let's have a go now actually doing the same thing over here for a normal distribution with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. So if in fact the stock returns are normal, they are fully described by the mean, mu, and standard deviation, sigma. Now Excel doesn't in fact contain a function to do this automatically. I'll go in here, and I'll just go down here and put in my first random number. And to make this work, I in fact have to use this thing here called norm S inverse. It returns the inverse of the standard normal cumulative distribution. That's what that function in fact does. In fact, returns what we are after. So down the page, you just go to that cell, let's just type in norm S inverse, and in an exam or in the subject, you need to know what this is doing. So it's norm S inverse, RAND, probability here, hit the enter key, and there is a number. That number there should be probably no less than minus 3.5, no greater than plus 3.5, on average 0, and standard deviation of 1. Okay. I'll go into edit mode here. I'll just go to my name. Whoops, I'll just go in here for a second. I will copy that to the clipboard. I'll go in here and just select from that cell across to P 134. Hit the enter key and then just go control enter. That didn't work. I'll go to my formula bar here, control enter, and now on screen now I've actually got this vector here of drawings from the standardised bell-shaped curve. Okay, I could do the same statistics as before, so I'll go in here and just put those there on the right hand side. In this case there are no numbers. I'll just go in here, I'll just call it N1 dot for normal distribution 1 and N2 dot. And to save time here, I'll in fact apply those names to that vector with my formulas tab, create from selection. I'll go in here, I'll just apply the min function to that column, which is in fact has the name there of N1 dot. Copy that down. Whoops, I've mucked it up, so copy that down, Control C, boom boom, and go in here and make that one into the max So the max shouldn't exceed 3.5. The minimum shouldn't exceed minus 3.5 typically. The average, of course, should be close to 0. And of course, the standard deviation of the sample would be, in fact, sort of close to 1. And there's the numbers there on the screen. Of course, the correlation here should be the same as the other one. They should, in fact, be sort of random correlation here. It's coral applied to n1 dot, comma, n2 dot. So once again, that's sort of close to whatever. If you got lost there, that's pretty straightforward stuff. So let's go over here and put in those. Functions. Okay, so for a uniform one distribution, this pattern here has got no obvious pattern on the screen. Now, some people might say, of course, that the space between the dots is in fact not uniform. You can in fact apply techniques to in fact sort of make the data more spread out evenly on the screen. Let's go in now and do another XY scatter plot based upon these two vectors. So select those two vectors there, go in and insert another XY scatter plot on the screen. I'll just cut that and paste up here so I actually see the thing. And this time on the right hand side, I'm just going to make my axis a bit more fixed. I'll go in here, click on the first axis there, and just make that, for example, go from minus 4 to plus 4. That's done there. And this one here will also go from minus 4 to plus 4. Close that down, just make the thing square. Now basically now, because this thing is in fact based on the bell-shaped curve, when you press F9 it should in fact update just the same, but it should in fact be more clustered here around the 0, 0 axis. So generally, of course, the axis there is the peak of the bell-shaped curve. You've got two bell-shaped curves from 90-degree angles. It should be much more dense around the origin and much less dense out here in the tails. Okay, and it shouldn't be much less than minus 3.5, much greater than plus 3.5. But when I was doing work on Excel decades ago, back in sort of about Excel 95 or something, used this technique there. It actually had a number of around about minus 3 million. So basically in that version of Excel, this generator was up the creek. It just gave you weird answers. You have to in fact use your own Massaglia routine to in fact return answers, because the one built in wouldn't work well. Okay, it's 8:38. Now in the class this morning, I only finished the work here today on the random functions. I did no work, for example, on the thing here called the finance function. I'll actually cover that a little bit later on in the course. We won't, in fact, cover it this week. Let's have a go now doing the same thing, because in finance, of course, between each pair of stocks, the correlation between returns, in fact, has a positive number. Okay, so back here on the random numbers thing, let's have a go now at, in fact, doing the last one here, trying to create some numbers which, in fact, have a built-in correlation structure. Okay, that's the third task in the class tonight. Okay, so over here, I'll go in now and built in sort of it's called built-in correlation, and the important word here is Cholesky. Cholesky, I think, was probably a Polish mathematician who first wrote up the material in this area. So it's actually called Cholesky decomposition, which a couple of you might have done before, but most people, in fact, haven't. So you don't really need to know anything about Cholesky decomposition at all, because we You know, I've survived for decades and never learned it about it formally. But basically here, to make this work, there's a formula over here on the left-hand side, which we in fact need to copy and paste to show what's going on. So I'll go over here and paste that formula around about that cell just there, okay. Now first of all need to put in a correlation number, and in this area of statistics we often denote correlation by the Greek symbol rho. I'll just type it in there in English, but rho is in fact the Greek word, and of course by definition correlation, if there is none, is 0. It can be as high as +1 or as low as -1. I'll go in here and apply that label to that cell. So on my formulas tab, create from selection. So in fact that 0 in fact now has the name of RHO, rho. Okay. My chart's in the road. I'll just drag my chart out of the road for a short time, just park it over there. Now, you need to have a clear mind at this current stage. I'm going to go first of all and generate a Z1 and a Z2 based upon an N01 distribution. I'll go in here and put in the label here of Z1, okay, and also Z2. Let's make this vector 100 points long, roughly. So let's insert there random numbers from the normally distributed 0, 1 distribution. Off you go. Have a go at doing 100 observations, or plus or minus 1, of drawings from the standardised bell-shaped curve, which we just did about 2 minutes ago. Whoops, I've lost my microphone. So Z1 and Z2 are from the normal standardised bell-shaped curve. Once again, do it two ways. I can go in here and just select a vector by hand. That's in fact 24 rows long, 47, 70, 93, 94, 100 rows equals norm dot s.inv applied to the random function, open, close, control enter. There's in fact our same numbers as before. Okay, once again that cell there equals get CF. Contains that formula. I've left around about, you need to leave about 3 rows there, or 3 columns on the right-hand side. Who's stuck? Anyone stuck? So I've got 2 vectors, Z1 and Z2, both from the standardised bell-shaped curve, norm S inverse, with the probability there coming from a 0, 1 random distribution. There's my drawings from the bell-shaped curve. Next thing is to talk about this thing called Z3. Of course, this Z3 is a formula derived by Cholesky. It's the first element. It's in fact element 1, 1 from a Cholesky decomposition matrix. Let's call it Z3. Just follow the formula. There it is on the right-hand side. So equals rho. Click on the cell. So it's rho times Z1. So rho times Z1 on the same row, plus the square root from Excel of 1 minus rho squared, so caret 2, then close the bracket. In the class this afternoon, a student didn't put the bracket there, she put it at the very end, and multiply that by Z2. So it's rho 1, it's rho times Z1 plus the square root of 1 minus rho squared times Z2. Hit the enter key, there's the formula, and in that cell there equals get CF. That contains that one. Anyone stuck? So I'm trying to generate on the screen here some random numbers which in fact have a built-in correlation structure to be able to simulate stock returns based upon known parameters. It's used a bit in simulation of stock returns. Take my word for it. You might have done it in portfolio theory, possibly not, but anyhow, we do it here tonight. So let's just go in now and complete Z3 down the page. Now your task now is in fact to do an xy scatter plot of Z1 and Z3. Now those two vectors there are not side by side, they are non-contiguous. So to in fact cheat here, I will go in here equals that cell, double click. Now that cell there actually says, that cell there in fact says equals get CF. That cell there is linked to the original Z1 vector. It is not a new series of random numbers. In fact, those two numbers there are the same on a pairwise basis. Okay. So basically now, I can go in now and select those two vectors, include another XY scatter plot on the screen. There it is. Make it a bit more square there. Oh, was it got to? It's not been very cooperative. I'll go in here and just cut that Control X. Got the page here. Why don't I in fact paste it pretty close to my row thing? I'll put it around about there somewhere. Control V. It should be sort of square. So when I go in here and press the F9 key, like before, it should be clustered around the 0, 0 origin, the peak of the bell-shaped curve. But if I go in now and do two things, I can go in here, and in fact, I can go in here and use my correlation statistic applied to my Z3, comma, and my Z, I mucked that up, truly, equals the correlation, applied to Z3, comma, I pressed the wrong key, and back to this one, Z1 in down arrow, close the bracket. That number there is the one coming from the data, which is close to this one because this is only 100 observations here. Every time you press F9, that should in fact cycle around 0. So press F9, it's negative. Press it again, it's positive. It's pretty close to 0 on average there. Okay. Now if I go in now and make correlation around about 0.5, you'll see now in the chart changes. It becomes a bit more focused in that axis. Let's make correlation much stronger, around about 0.9, so plus 0.9. It's now really starting to move towards my 45-degree upward sloping line through that. So once again, that's my theoretical number. Actual data is returning, in my case, 0.917. Let's go in here and put in, for example, 0.99. In that case, getting pretty close to being 45 degrees. Let's make correlation plus 1. So at the extreme here, when you have perfect positive correlation, your return series should be, of course, plotting on the 45-degree upward sloping line through the origin. Let's go in here and make correlation negative. Let's make it around about minus 0.5. In this case here, better off in fact using something like, for example, a validation box, 0.5. Let's make it minus 0.9. Looking like that. Let's make it minus 0.99. Looking like that. And of course, minus 1, it converges there to the backward sloping line. So basically, we show correlation, you can in fact use an XY scatter plot. Okay. Now if we go in here and in fact make correlation, for example, 0.3, which is sort of mildly positive, but you have to see what the pattern here is on the right-hand side. So on your assignment, some of the data observations are only for about a month or so. You only have 20 dots. If you go, for example, to 1 or 2 years, you might in fact have between 200 and 400 dots in your assignment. Okay. So on the screen here, it would be hard to see what's going on. So let's just go in here and add what we call a trend line. Make sure the chart has been selected. Go to your Design tab here. Now let's go in here and add a chart element. I'm on my Design tab in Excel 2013. Should be the same basically in 2016. Add a chart element here called a trend line linear. It's on the screen. You just click on the trend line. I'll go in here and make my trend line. I'll make my trend line here have a colour scheme. I prefer to show it in red. I'll make it, I'll get rid of the dots. So currently the dots here, where's my dash type? Can't even see the line type. Oh, it's hard to find things. So my dash type, I want my dash type solid. It's on the screen now. This is in fact my trend line. So although it's quite mildly positive, that trend line's upward sloping, so more than likely that data in fact has a positive correlation. If you make correlation 0 here, of course, that trend line should be close to 0 or close to flat. Make it quite negative there, minus 0.5. Once again, it's going to go in here and be 45-degree backward sloping. And at the very extreme, with perfect positive correlation, like let's make it 0.99, it's all focusing there towards my trend line. And at the extreme here, correlation of 1, it all plots there on the upward sloping 45-degree trend line. So as far as returns are concerned, you can plot them and simulate them like this. The correlation number is one way to work out the answer here. An XY scatter plot with a trend line also conveys information about the relationship between different pairs of returns on stocks or any sort of asset that you are working on in a finance environment. What's another way of actually showing correlation? Another way, of course, is to use a sine graph, which I won't show you tonight. Okay, well, the final part there is, I'll finish up fairly soon actually, so let's go now across to this website for a short time. Back here to class number 6. So there's one here in fact called 6.2.1, a scatter plot here with a correlated random numbers. This is what you've just done, but this one here explains about Cholesky. That's about the system here. Okay, there's the formula. And on the screen here is in fact a data validation panel. That one there's a validation. This one here has got 2,500 dots. How do I know? I counted the things. Make it 5,000 dots. There's 5,000 dots. Or go in here and make it, for example, as low as there 625 dots. That's the pattern there on screen. I can make my correlation here go into, for example, a correlation here of make my correlation there of 1. There's the plot there, or the correlation here of 0.95. There's the pattern there on the screen on the right-hand side. So on the screen here, I've actually got that first box there, in fact, has a validation telling the user what's been allowed to enter. And this one here, of course, has a selector from a list information. Down the page here, all the summary stats, correlation numbers here coming back from that series, and I'm not quite sure what the data is. Might be on a different worksheet somewhere. Anyhow, that's in fact called an XY scatter plot, which in fact uses lots of stuff there in relation to selector panel, the points window, descriptive statistics panel, and down the page here, things you can do to in fact make it work. That's how it's done. So in your assignment, you are required to do an XY scatter plot with trend line. Basically, you just need returns 1 vector and returns 2 vector. That's all you need. And the final part there is your XY scatter plot. The XY scatter plot, there are things that go wrong. The XY scatter plot does not have any dates. It's each coordinate here on a pairwise basis. There are no dates in the chart. It's amazing how many times dates show up in assignment work. Very good. So in the class tonight, I haven't in fact done this part here on random numbers. It'll get picked up in around about class number 10 in VBA. Okay, so at this point, we'll finish up there in the class tonight. Now, to get you on the same page as this morning and tomorrow, back here on the resources page, there's this thing called the stock analyzer thing. I'll update this on the weekend to include some more stuff about how to do things more easily. Okay, that'll be done on the weekend in preparation for your assignment, which is due 2 weeks after tomorrow. Thanks for your time. That's the easy part. Students say the VBA is much harder. Not really, but some people think it's scary. Most people enjoy it, but that's in store for next week. So I'll be here for another 10 minutes or so. Have fun. Be nice to your group members. And check this website after the weekend. Good luck. Are there any questions? Any questions? Finish your assignments? Yep.
Can I have some clarification for the assignment?
Yep.
Like,
Oh, I guess so. You can ask.
Yeah.
You can ask.
Like, we are going to download 7.
Did you send the email? Is that from you? Someone asked me that question on an email.
No, it's not me.
Okay.
So it's
What's
like
the alternative? So you're asking me about 7.
So like 6 company and an index, right?
What's the other alternative? If that's one of the questions, what else could you do?
Choosing one company from each industry.
Well, that's what the person in the email sort of was talking about.
I didn't see any.
No, that's what the person was saying on the email.
Yeah.
Okay. So why are you asking, what's the thought that's producing this question?
Because we are not sure whether we choose one.
No, but
Yeah, that's a second
but my reaction is coming from the fact that, so on the assignment, it talks about what, you're asking this question,
Yeah.
and that's talked about here quite early on. Okay, so it gives you a list there of these stocks somewhere, and those stocks are in industries
Yeah.
coming from that website.
Yeah.
Okay, how many stocks are in each industry? Sorry?
Many stocks.
Hundreds.
I mean, do we must do these 6 company or we can choose by ourselves?
Well, this is why I get perplexed here, okay? So there's all these companies there, sector constituent companies, okay? Sample company names are those, okay? Go to the search right and for the sample companies.
So that's why like the sample company.
The sample companies, and this one here is that sector's sample company names, and this sector here has those sample company names.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you could actually have a different answer. Isn't it sort of answering your question? I'm not trying to be rude or anything, I'm just trying to make conversation, so...
他说就是 Okay, so
So you could go to that and download hundreds of the whole hundreds of them,
yeah.
if you wanted to.
And we can choose 6.
But why are you saying one from each one? Or your own ones, okay?
Or okay.
So Joy's saying that of all these hundreds of ones here, in those two sectors, I've given you 3 and 3. Download the available for the sample companies. And they are, as it says here, the sample company names. They are the sample companies. How does that sound? So the answer is,
It is these companies.
no, the answer is, how many?
6.
What's the index?
Yeah,
Yes.
7. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Because like because in the group, if one person have different opinion,
I
like
know,
other
but
people will
let's
get,
go back
okay.
and think about it a bit more carefully.
Yeah, and another second.
Not another question.
Sorry.
I'm not in your group. Anyhow, asking the question, I mightn't answer it.
And the second is worksheet, and the second like stock summary. So
Yeah.
we choose like because in the sample there's one part for company, another part for the index.
Yep.
So do we choose like just one company from the 6 and compare with the index, or we put 6 companies with the index?
Well, have you actually tried it or not?
I think it's like just to choose one and then compare with the index. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, look, I said to the class this afternoon, I'll go home on the weekend and actually read the assignment through carefully again. and I'll update that web page about clarification points.
Okay.
Because I hate writing these assignments. They take ages to write. I've written the thing, I've published the thing, but I haven't had the strength to go back and actually read it carefully again just to make sure it's clear.
Oh,
So
okay.
next week, after Monday, if it's still uncertain, then get back to me.
Or okay.
Okay? But I don't want people saying, how do we do this? I don't want to give you the answers. I want you to think about these things. Okay? But if it's some sort of vague, I will clarify. But I think the one about the samples should have been clear.
Yeah.
In my mind,
It's yeah, and also like, cause is there already some formula in the worksheet?
yes.
Do we have to use that formula? Like,
I don't know what to say to do.
so can we choose the different method, or we have to use that? Kind of
With
formula
respect to
method?
what? You've been very vague here. This is
Like-
what I
like
don't like.
indirect
Look,
method or direct
you'll say,
method.
you said I could do this, but you haven't given me an exact example of a formula you're proposing to change. Which one are you proposing to change?
I was thinking the VLOOKUP indirect method and direct method.
Yeah, we want to use a direct method.
Direct,
Yeah.
relating to what? So once again, it's coming from a selector panel. How would you make it work? How would you make it work with a selector panel? Is my response to you. If you actually try and do it,
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think there's any other way of actually
Because we
doing
haven't-
it.
we-
But I'm open to creative, very clever people. Okay,
We haven't finished all of them. I just
that's
like,
right.
two
So
step-
I think
step
when
by
you
step,
actually
yeah.
actually try doing
Because
it,
it's like all related. We don't want to